This podcast and every other podcast that I make is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Patreon also comes with a bunch of different tiers, including extra content, unedited versions of podcasts, and things like outtakes and bloopers. You also get ad-free versions on both video and audio versions of the show, and there are a bunch of other tiers as well, like you can ask questions, or you're first in line to play a game with me every month. Most importantly though, the Patreon helps to support shows like this one, so huge thanks to all of our supporters on Patreon. Enjoy the show.
I think this time I'm going to call it now, and if this part makes it into the podcast, I'm sure it'll be ironically hilarious later. Like, I'm going to call it. I think you've set it up perfectly this time. I think we are above.
We've done it right.
As starters of the podcast, we have done our jobs properly.
It's only taken like 100 tries, but
well. Alanah didn't give us the chance to shine until, quite recently. We've only been able to start the podcast a few times. So, honestly, as a leader, it's on her. It's on her for not giving us the opportunity
to fair.
Reveal our true hidden depths.
She's really holding us back. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think we should.
It's kind of Alanah's attitude, though. She's quite a mean person, I think.
The coup that has been brewing is finally inevitable.
We're in this moment.
I mean, I do have host powers. Good. Continuing to support the release of that show that we talked about last time, the Thai Cave Rescue.
On Netflix now. Watch it without the dub. It's great.
Yes, exactly. I have a friend who has invested in a pretty burly home theater setup, and he wanted to watch it. And because I hadn't been able to see the true final, combo of sound design and the proper mix, especially, in the 5.1 and Atmos mixes.
Yeah.
Of the last few episodes, I attended the final sound mix for the last episode, and we had the screening in a movie theater of the first two episodes. So the third, fourth, and fifth, there were a few visual effects and finalized things that I saw the picture locked version, but there's a few little kind of things that I don't think it's even fair to call them polish because they're quite essential and mandatory. But they're different from fundamental edit kind of choices, picture lock kind of things. So there are a few little things I hadn't seen. So my friend hosted Angela and I over at his house to do a binge of all 6 episodes on Sunday.
That's great.
In a proper Atmos. He's got this crazy projector that's got warnings all over it of if you look directly into it while it's running, you will meet
the
God.
The cinema will overpower you.
You will melt, Raiders of the Lost Ark style for sure. So anyway, it was great to kind of properly watch it, and an interesting thing cropped up where every time the episode ends, it starts the end credits and gives you about 3 seconds to decide to opt in before it just tosses you into the next episode. And, I recognize that Netflix probably is in a continuous state of tuning that, how long those timeouts are going to be based on...
But I imagine that's kind of irritating to watch a chunk of your work just kind of be immediately disregarded.
Well, It was funny because
on the primary platform.
Yeah, well, exactly. My friend he missed all 6 credits because it's a pitch black theater, and he has a little remote that's a little touchpad that controls the.
Oh, so he was lunging.
So he would reach for it, but then you have to wake up the pad and then tab over to the it defaults when the cursor comes up. It defaults to next episode to in case the 3 seconds is too long, you can manually click to go to the next episode, or tab to the left and watch the credits. And the funny thing was, we made the decision to write new music for each credit. It's not like a repeating end credit piece. It's
now I think about it, I think I might have let Netflix skip those, which I feel immediately awful about.
No, well, that's the thing.
I need to go back and listen to those.
It's all on the soundtrack album, but it is a
Is that
interesting
soundtrack album available to purchase?
it is
I listen to
everywhere.
that on my platforms of choice.
It's even on Bandcamp, thanks to Netflix letting me do
that's
that.
cool.
But yeah, it's everywhere, and there's tons of music that's not on the album because they wanted to keep the album to about 90 minutes, and we wrote almost 5 hours of music. But in any case, the point being this idea that the end credits, like, I was fascinated by this notion that most people. They only do that, I'm sure, in reaction to the fact that if it automatically plays into the credits, they probably see a noticeable drop off of people that don't continue to the next episode. They just stop watching
satisfied. People feel a sense of completion on that, and they
might
stop.
I can see the calculation of you're on the fence about whether to keep going. The credits play long enough for you to go, you know what? I guess I'm good for the day, and you turn it off, and then life takes precedent, and then you forget about the show and you never keep going.
I think it's more emotional. I think it's like when I watch a show and I'm allowed to watch the end credits, I feel like an end point. Like, it feels like a natural ending. It's not that I'm sat there looking at my watch and I'm going to get on with my day. It's that I have had a complete experience. Whereas if you keep chopping off the experience, they're edging the audience, for lack of a better phrase, right? That's the whole...
I think so.
They're kind of keeping you at that point of not finishing. I feel terrible about the analogy I've walked into.
No.
But we're good.
It's it is like, obviously the show is the thing that we're all in service of. So I don't begrudge anybody not watching the ending credits. It's one of those. That's one of those things that ending credits are some combination of there for the cinephiles / to fulfill contractual obligations. It's not like, other than the Pixar kind of, let's stylize the first half of them.
But when you think about like peak HBO, what they did, all of their, or like how important the credits were to, like, you watching like a Deadwood, and every single episode has like a unique, beautiful piece of music that suits the Sopranos, like all of that kind of stuff. Like the end credits, like I associate with, like, specifically on TV, like there's that kind of era, that golden age, whatever, of like the HBO drama. There was a lot of, I guess, more licensed stuff than necessarily soundtracked credits, but like Warrior as well, like just that kind of always having something different every single ending I quite like. But yeah, I
remember Breaking Bad doing that, but I always assumed that the reason Breaking Bad was doing that was in part or primarily because there was so little score. Like, there was pretty soft touch. I mean, it's very effective music, but it wasn't some big musically driven show. It was pretty
you'd be
sparse.
forgiven for saying there was no music, and that was a layman,
so.
right? You'd miss it.
So I think that it was sort of like to help kind of counter his lack of a voice in the storytelling as an overall thing. He could
that would be
he could make a statement. Yeah, because I'll never forget when the show introduced the character. It's been so many years, I don't remember his name, but the kind of elderly guy who never speaks, and he's in the wheelchair, and he has the little bell that he rings.
Ding ding ding.
Yeah, I remember the ending credits starting with the sound of the bell, and then like the sound turning backwards and be like, and then became a piece of music, and it was clearly designed for that episode, and I thought it was awesome. But in any case, I found it. I bet it's both, and probably more than just those two things. But the idea that the emotional feeling of completion as a demotivator to continue is probably at work on some subset of the audience. And then there's the other subset where they are, it's 11:30 at night, and you're going, do I watch one more or do I go to bed? And if you watch one more, the odds for every episode you watch, the odds that you'll keep going to the end of the season probably go up. Whereas if you stop at episode 3, probably. I mean, I don't know. I certainly don't know Netflix's user data. I'm sure that's locked in a vault of, with like nuclear codes, like it's probably...
Well, we see it. You're right, though. I can definitely, with video games, if you look at our metrics of like people completing games, you're absolutely right that basically if someone gets to like halfway through a game, chances are they're going to finish the game. Our numbers of people who get 50% through a game are similar to people who get to 100% on it, or 100% in terms of like completing the game through, not necessarily like unlocking everything or whatever. But seeing end credits on a game, generally the 50% and 100% are similar enough to be statistically kind of,
it makes total sense.
Well, basically backing up what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, it's a perfectly understandable psychological phenomenon. And
sunk cost fallacy, basically, right? Like, from entertainment sunk cost, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get
an investment
the calculation on Netflix. I share their aim of what would make more people watch the show. So I don't take it personally that the credits end up getting squashed. It is interesting, though, that it has narrowed to literally, not only is it quite literally under 5 seconds, I think it was 3 that you have to respond. But on top of that, the show doesn't have a big elaborate main title sequence. Again, in the interest of engagement, I assume. It was never even discussed.
Yeah, it's only about 30 seconds, right? Because I remember I genuinely
15.
I was kind of watching it and I was like getting into what you were setting up, and then boom, you're into the episode. I remember the first episode being like, really? That's...
Yeah.
Because often you'll have like a long version on like the first episode and then you notice it getting shorter as it goes on or
exactly,
whatever.
That's very
common. But I was genuinely surprised
of The Simpsons,
you didn't get more time.
Opening couch gags that have become like 5-minute long short films. That's just the main title sequence expanding forever and ever and ever. But yeah,
go on.
Well, I was going to say is that it's funny to me that it gives you the option to skip the opening when it is quite literally a 15-second thing as well. That's all I was going to say. What were you going to ask?
I was going to ask, like, because I know for me, it takes me literally years to be able to like play something I've directed and not be immediately like spotting all the things I would have done. Can you sit in that wonderful, cinematic, you and your mate Martin Scorsese's home cinema? Can you sit and watch? Can you sit and watch an episode and not be noticing all the things that you would have liked to have tweaked, or that you feel like they maybe messed up on the sound design? Or can you listen in as an audience member yet? Well, what's your kind of half-life on that stuff? When can you get back to just enjoying something you worked on?
It's really, I mean, it's a bit of a spectrum. I'm definitely I'm like you. Probably most everybody who makes stuff for a living has a hard time consuming their thing. Like I've spent the last 10 years explaining to these truly wonderful, beautiful, teary-eyed Journey supporters. I've had to spend 10 years explaining to them that I've never been able to play the game the way they have. Like I've never experienced that way. And I really can't. I can see it on an intellectual level, like what they're responding to, and it evokes all those conversations of what we tried to make.
Bullshit, right? We get to make anything we want exist, but then we can never enjoy it. It's a proper little like that's a fable. It's like
it's got this kind of
genie.
Greek tragedy kind of quality to it.
100%.
Not to overinflate ourselves, but
we're like gods. No, we are like gods, Austin. We are like gods. Like, to be very clear to the audience, we are.
And especially, I was going to say, for those who have failed to make the call time on today's taping, they are disqualified from godhood.
The time. That's all I'm saying. Gods. They may arrive when they want to, but they know what time they're meant to arrive.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good play, watch, listen t-shirt. Gods. What did you say? Gods are on time. Gods. I think I was paraphrasing Tolkien at that point. They're arriving exactly when they mean to. Yeah, but you said it in a way that is
stealing from the best.
Truly. In any case, so I occasionally work on something that is so good. The sum of its parts managed to override my
you're enjoying everyone else's contribution so much that you don't notice yours.
Like I had tears in my eyes watching this show on Sunday, and it's definitely not on account of my music. It's like in spite of that, I'm able to kind of appreciate the actors, appreciate the cinematography. And also, I think in the case of the show, knowing that it's a true story and it's so faithful to the true story, I get really wrapped up in this idea that, the stuff that those people are made of, that they rose to the occasion in service of, in the overwhelming majority of cases, total strangers, just to try and help, just to be, some small portion, or in some of the cases of like the divers and people like that, a major part of it, just the volunteer nature of it. I get so moved by the kind of humanism of that.
I might be being ignorant of the pros because I've obviously never worked in like TV or film, but like I would assume, don't you, when you're writing a cue, you have the scene basically, like maybe it's not got the final. So you've seen every impactful moment of that show infinite
I've
number
seen
of times
every
in the
frame,
process.
whether it had music or not, many, many times. In this case,
So
especially,
how does that emotion still maintain? Because if you watch the same sad movie 100 times, it's going to impact you less. Is it just because of the true story aspect, or is it something about the holistic, seeing it in the round as part of the whole show?
I think it's both, but I do think the true nature of it is kind of a little bit of a cheat. It's like a shortcut to my emotional, sort of empathic nature. But I think that I've had it. I did a movie a long time ago called Captain Abu Ra'ad, which is the world. Weirdly, trivia about that is the first ever Jordanian feature film. It was all shot mostly in Amman, Jordan, and similar to this, it's all it's all local, mostly non-actors, and it's not a true story though. But it has a very fable, almost Spielberg kind of quality to it, and I watched that. I mean, that played at Sundance and a million other festivals, and I ended up watching it probably in excess of 20 times with audiences as part of the festival. Like, I traveled around with the director. It was the first major film that I had ever done. It was the first major, really, anything that had any kind of life like that. I did it right at the same time as Flow, and Flow went online, and then I got to read online people's reactions. But film festivals gave you an opportunity to sit with people while they experience the film, which is truly... It's very nerve-wracking because obviously if it's not landing with them, you very much feel that. It's like a stand-up comic who's bombing or something. But this film was really special. I had it recently
when I went to a games event, and one of our old games was there playable, and I had no idea going to this event that the game was playable. That happened completely without me involved. And I just went and stood and watched people play it. And there was one guy who was explaining for 5 minutes very loudly why he hated the game while I was stood kind of behind, and I was listening, and I was listening to this kid, and I was agreeing with 75% of what he was saying, and I was like, that's
Are you really, intentionally not saying which game it was?
I would never publicly negatively talk about any of my old games, because they're all brilliant, and you should pick them up in sales.
Fair enough.
Yeah, this person was talking about it. I was like, yeah, no, that's fair. That's a valid description of what
well, I think most sort of counterparts to your version, like the other Bithels of the world who might have happened to, I think would have not resisted the temptation to get in there and go, well, here's the thing you're missing. You don't understand. There's this.
Oh, no.
No, I get that you wouldn't do that, but it would have been interesting and difficult to resist. But yeah, I don't know. It's I mostly can't truly enjoy these things. I think the only game that I ever actually played as like a player in earnest, like where I got really into the systems of it and played like as if I had no attachment to it, was the Banner Saga trilogy. Those, for whatever reason, that's just as a genre of game right in my sweet spot. I just really loved the pacing. I love the art style. And again, it's like a little hard for me to kind of not get distracted by all the things I wish I could change, or that, I realize, I'm so much better, or I'll just sit there going, I don't know why I did this. Like I'll sit there distracted trying to remember why I did this versus that, and et cetera, et cetera. Most games it's just too, that inner voice is too loud to really kind of play the game as a normal person. And, but for whatever reason, the Banner Saga I played through, I think twice, which is, a non-trivial number of hours for a thing that I had already played probably 200 hours in playtesting before the game even shipped. So, yeah, it is. You would think it would get totally burned. I mentioned that Captain Abu Ra'ad because that film would make me cry every time I watched it with an audience. It's just such a beautiful film, and the lead actor Nadim Sawalha. Do you know Julia Sawalha? She's kind of famous in the UK. She's
comic actor.
Yeah, she did the voice of the lead actress voice in Chicken Run opposite Mel Gibson, and a bunch of other TV. I think her father is this kind of wonderful elder statesman Jordanian British actor who, among other things, got thrown out of a window by Jaws in one of the Bond films. And he was Sean Connery's sidekick in The Wind and the Lion. He plays the title character, Captain Abu Ra'ad. Just amazing. I mean, he should have been nominated for an Oscar. I mean, it's one of those performances where he's just so good. He's like the grandpa you just desperately want, and it's just, what a great film that was. And this show kind of brought back some of that, where it's just, there's such a humanism to it. It's such a story of a reflection of like the best we can be as a people, as a species, that as someone who is definitely wired towards optimism and a kind of happy spin on the world, it kind of taps into a nerve that sort of overwhelms me.
I'm a cynic, but I definitely enjoy that in my fiction, for sure. It's nice.
Brutal. Well, that's what's the beauty of this Ty
This is a true story. It's a true story.
Yeah, exactly. It's a true story.
It's kind of above my cynicism, which I liked. I enjoyed watching as a result. And it felt, I think, as well, though, they definitely addressed the cynic in the audience. Like, it definitely was a show that didn't shy away from showing the imperfection, which only made, you know, the heroism of the characters who were heroic better. Like, they weren't creating kind of cartoony villains, but there was lots of like apathy and people not bothering and kind of that kind of stuff, which definitely kind of grounded it for me.
Yeah, there's definitely the kind of
aren't people wonderful, I think I probably would have tuned out.
Yeah, it's not. No, yeah, it's not. I mean, even like one of the boys, he's desperate to get away from his parents, and he like that's like a recurring motif in the show that was upset, or especially in the first episode, that he's upset with the coach for telling the parents about the game, because then they show up and he was just hoping to have one day free of their fighting and their bickering. Like, it's a very kind of unpleasant household for him. And that's true. Like, when we got to go and meet the boys, the parents, that particular kid's parents did not come that night, because I think they probably also were not too happy with Netflix at their accurate portrayal on a fucking for 200 million people to see. And so it's an interesting thing that they definitely sought realism and accuracy over the kind of rose-colored thing. All that said, you guys were very indulgent letting me go on about it last time, and so I will happily pivot away from it to not be overly Austin-centric. But the show raised a question that I've been dying to ask you guys about, which we only kind of tapped at the very end of, this notion of titles, because I think I mentioned, I don't remember if I said this out loud or if I was just thinking of it, that when I was scoring it, I was sure that Thai Cave Rescue was like the project code name. I didn't think they would actually ship with that name, because it just seemed like that's not a name. But like, as I zoomed out, I realized, well, I understand the notion of like just explaining the premise in the name. And I started thinking, I mean, I guess, is there any difference between that and Deathloop? Like, that's actually a really dumb name. But maybe that's the genius. You know what I mean? I get a little lost in the weeds and like pretentious about aspiring to an elegance, you know, like I remember the showrunner at one point saying, you know, he thought, what if we called it, you know, like The Boys and the Cave or something? And it's like, would fewer people watch The Boys in the Cave, especially knowing that there was a real thing that happened and that this is a telling of that real thing versus just See, I liked the Ron Howard movie title 13 Lives. That's a great name. But you know, it's maybe less
could
clear.
Could be a horror movie, could be
could be about things, 1.5 cats. Actually, what is it? 9 lives. Yeah, not quite.
Not quite, but that's okay.
Yeah, so I was curious your take on this, because like, for example, Subsurface Circular, that's a title that has the opposite problem, arguably, but I'm curious if your data reflects that or how you think about this, because, you know...
It's a fair question. It's an argument we have every single time.
Probably every production, probably every game, unless it's, you know, Assassin's Creed or something where they're inheriting the name and they know that people are going to know what that means and they have that advantage going for them. But it just made me realize, I thought even Star Trek is a very silly name. Like, it is, it's sort of, it is, somehow comes across as elegant, but it almost feels like a trick. Because when you sit there and really analyze it head on, you go, is it actually a good name? I don't know. Star Wars? Like, maybe they are actually pretty equal in their bluntness to Thai Cave, or like, what was the Money Heist? You know, like, I look at it and I go, yeah, I don't know. But I was curious, what's your kind of ideal versus then the compromise that is required of marketing?
That's normally it normally comes down to, with most of our games, I believe, and I'm probably wrong because everyone always takes credit for every idea. I think I've come up with the title of every game we've done. I'm sure I'm wrong.
You
about
did
one
coin the term Tron, so yes.
Well, so the Tron thing's very interesting. I don't know if I can tell the story of the name on the show, actually, but
Okay.
I will tell you offline the story of the name on Tron Identity because that's a fun one. But
Let's hold like a note that we can be coming in at the edit point of like. So anyway, you were saying that was a great story. I'm so enlightened. Story. My God, if only you were allowed to say that publicly.
Thrown open the doors of the Walt Disney Company for you. So generally it's an argument or a discussion between me and my business partner Alexander. We generally fall on two sides. So I tend to be the one who wants a vibe or like a story thing, and he's usually the one who's frankly being the voice of reason and going, you have to kind of tell people what the thing is. And usually I would say he indulges me with the titles, and most of our titles are a bit more esoteric. I think Solitaire Conspiracy is a good example of one that he totally won, because he just literally said to me, it's like early on in the process, like, this is a solitaire game and you have to tell the audience who wants to play a solitaire game that this is a solitaire game. And then my reaction to that was, well, fuck you, I'm going to make the bad guy in this game called Solitaire, and it's going to be a conspiracy that he's triggering, so the game's going to be called Solitaire Conspiracy, so it's going to be a story. And for me, I like that. I definitely like a name. I hadn't realized
that's where that came. Like, you were outmaneuvering the voice of reason.
Basically, because one thing I really like is like puns or like secondary meanings in titles. I think a title,
for sure, part
of it is to get people in the door, but part of it is then to be remembered long enough for them to recommend it to a couple of mates or whatever. So like definitely with the circular game, Subsurface Circular is intentionally like a phrase that's interesting, and an interesting kind of phrase, like it sticks in your brain in a way that like train story probably wouldn't.
Train dialogue.
And then what was fun was then when we decided to make like a game that was in a similar vein to that, Quarantine Circular worked. But then we had the problem because we knew we wanted to make a game about quarantine, but there was no circle involved. So we had to, again, kind of backwards narrative from there. So there's a circle that the alien's in that game that they can't move out of. So there was a weird kind of backpedaling. The other thing with my names for a very long time was they were deliberately, on some level, I always chose the names based on them being fun, but it was also me trying to take the piss out of a friend of mine. Rami, you know Rami,
yeah, of course,
Indie developer Rami, yeah. He took the piss out of me for Thomas Was Alone and said, like, that game would have sold like 5 times the units if you just called it like Rectangle Adventures. Like, Thomas Was Alone is such a pretentious, it implies that it's a very sad game. People still think Thomas Was Alone is like a moody, depressing game rather than hopefully what it is, which is a fun, kind of joyful game.
And it's funny. The game has a kind of a very British sense of humor.
And his joke was always like, you should have just called it like Rectangle Adventure, and he was like, it's so pretentious to do that. And I was like, okay, from now on, and this is going to blow your mind, Austin. Are you ready for a like end of Usual Suspects moment? From that point on,
let me get my coffee cup ready to drop.
From that point on, every name of every game I've done since has directly referenced shapes.
That's hilarious.
So you've got the Circular Games volume, Solitaire Conspiracy was the one where we broke through Arc Smith before that.
You are
Earth Shape.
You are to Rami.
Everything was always a shape reference.
You are to Rami what Zuckerberg at the end of The Social Network, where he's repeatedly checking the friend request status.
Yeah. I just poke at him.
You're never gonna let this go. Rami's gonna like have forgotten. He'll like have moved on in life and doesn't even know who you are anymore. And you're like,
oh no, he loves it. He loves it. He sends me every time we announced a game, I'd get a little like a DM, or next time I saw him, he'd kind of, you've done it again.
But I guess you had to,
because it was just every single time.
I guess this latest one has to break that pattern then.
Well, Solitaire Conspiracy was the one where it was like, well,
I guess the last two then.
Yeah, Solitaire Conspiracy was the moment where, like, we were trying to come up with the title, and I was the one who said, like, I can't keep naming my games just a joke with an old friend that I've been making for, like, 9 years. This is bad. This very clearly should be called Solitaire, and we'll work out a name. And then, obviously, with Tron, that's obviously a decision that's not just mine, so therefore, I was going to obviously move on from that idea.
Have you ever opted out of a game? Like, can you think of an example of not playing one because the title didn't grab you, and then later somebody said, "Oh, it's this," and you went, "Oh, it's that"? Or maybe a movie is a better question because you probably have your ear to the ground game-wise, that it would be hard to catch you.
Yeah, games, it would be hard to get past me. I'm trying to think. Do you have one?
I feel
like I
kind
forget.
of. I still haven't watched Money Heist, but that was one where when I heard the name, I was convinced that must surely be some like Netflix equivalent of a straight to DVD, like Ocean's 11 knockoff or something. You know how like you have the Walmart DVD movies? Like I thought it must surely be that, and then I've been led to believe that it's actually this amazing show.
I've still never seen it because, again, actually, you're absolutely right. I did the same thing. I was like, oh, it must be like a knockoff or reality TV show or something.
Yeah,
like, I was
but
like,
apparently it's really
too dumb a name
quite
for a
clever
good show.
and one that similarly, the name was. It's funny because I think I'm wired the same as you. I much prefer some slightly, arguably pretentious, hopefully elegant or poetic title for things.
It's fine. At this point, the audience knows the podcast they're listening to. They know who we are. It's fine.
True. I like those kinds of, even though, like what could be more ridiculous than calling a walking to the mountain game Journey? Like, it's not like my career isn't littered with like Abzu. There's a more interesting kind of, ooh, what is that? You know, but it asks a question that it trusts you to answer.
Like genuinely, I think Abzu was one where I was like, where I thought it was. I can't remember what I thought it was, but I didn't know what that was until much later. But yeah, I think.
But it can go both ways, right? Like once you know what it is, that's a very memorable title. In the same the way that Thomas Was Alone. Now that I know what it is, that's
the recognizable element. That's the same with Subsurface Circular. Those are names that you kind of do keep hold of. But the. Yeah, I don't know. I oscillate because I think, and that's one of the many reasons me and my business partner have kind of done okay over the decade, is we generally find ourselves respectfully on the opposite sides of a lot of arguments, and therefore we kind of end up in interesting places. And I think that's worked out well. So yeah, with Tron, obviously, there's lots more people in the room, but I really like the name Identity a lot. I think it suits the game. It works on like 3 or 4 levels with what the game's about, and identity discs, and solving a mystery which has an identity involved. Like there is lots of like interesting analogies and things. It works, but it doesn't tell you anything about the game, like for sure. It doesn't like tell you in terms of like if you're looking for what the genre of that game is. The interesting thing with that as well was Identity suits. It feels like Legacy. It fits with kind of the kinds of words that have been subtitles on Tron things before. You got Evolution, Uprising, Legacy. Like there's it feels Identity.
Yeah,
feels
it kind
like
of has an intuitive
that pattern.
camaraderie with those. I think one that I initially
Tron
didn't
Camaraderie
watch,
would be a good name. Sorry.
Tron Camaraderie. It's the romantic comedy.
It's the romantic comedy.
Set in the Tron.
Let me write that down. Shit.
I almost didn't watch, or I should say, I was slow to the party on White Lotus on HBO. Because that was one where I assume it had, for whatever reason, something about the name White Lotus felt like it was a serial killer show. And I don't know why. I have no argument for that. It just had that, like, those novels of like, Along Came a Spider. And like, there was something about the kind of almost fairy tale sounding or parable sounding name that made me just come to assumptions. And then I see people raving about it. And I'm like, it's probably just a very good serial killer show. And then at some point, somebody said, it's not that. Or no, I was just skimming through HBO and it showed up and I saw that it was tagged as being a comedy above all. And that made me go, what? Wait, what? And then I watched it and like everyone else afterward was just like, holy shit, this is amazing. unbelievable storytelling.
I couldn't finish it. I found it so because
really?
it was so good. Basically, yeah, I got so like you know, that kind of nervous energy that it exists around.
Yeah, right.
Like I just couldn't. It was similar to the kind of the great Last of Us 2 debacle. Like there's a certain kind of like nervous,
just on board
like
it too
social
much.
anxiety. I just can't take it because it was too good. Like I just got too freaked out by the kind of how awful everyone was and stuff. I just couldn't deal with it.
That's
But it's very
so
good. It's very
funny.
good.
I don't know that I've ever not watched something on account of that, but it's one of those where I wonder.
I'm very susceptible, like to like awkward situations, or like I definitely have like a physiological reaction to like what was the Uncut Gems?
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Genuinely, it's an amazing film, but like by the end of it, I felt hungover. Like I felt broken by it.
See that, and there's a good. That's one where
That's good.
it's not obvious
you know,
what it's about. It's an
exciting, it's a fun comedy. It's very chill. Yeah, he goes on a wacky adventure.
Uncut Gems creates the presumption of a heist film when I hear a title like that. Like it just feels like, you know, it's like unmarked 20s. Like it feels like something that a line that would come up in a Inside Job or Ocean's 11 type or Inside Man, you know, kind of thing. Anyway, it's one of the.
And you know
what?
What's interesting? Sorry, what you made me think about with that. Sorry, apologies. Is the other aspect of naming things, which is really tricky. So coming up with names is really tricky. The other thing, though, is usually if you're making something with a group of people, there's lots of people in the room, and basically any name you can come up with, there is a very easy dismissal of, and you end up getting into that loop of like people coming up with very good ideas, and then someone like Uncut Gems, for example, coming up as like an idea in a room, and someone else saying, it sounds like a heist movie, and they're not wrong, but there is that criticism of literally any name you come up with, except for Thai Cave Rescue. Like there is in even that, like obviously you mentioned like it didn't sound like it was as interesting maybe as it could be to you. Like it's a really interesting loop you get caught in. Half of the reason coming up with names is difficult is because coming up with names is difficult, but the other half is that criticizing a name is very easy.
Yeah.
So there's kind of an interesting kind of like, and I've been in those kind of brainstorms many times for like the names of games, the names of game companies, when I've been at kind of companies that are startups, or the name, just any naming conversation is really tricky. Because of that as well.
It
lots
is
of ideas, lots of shoot downs, kind of oscillating between each other.
It is.
In the end, someone just has to go, we're doing that one.
Right. Yeah, you need to just that. Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't begrudge the name Thai Cave Rescue. It's one that I would never have chosen, but I probably would have made a title that fewer people watched because, like you said, the voice of reason goes, let's explain very clearly what this is. And, you know, a great name, you know, the best name is one that can do it all. Jurassic Park, you know, like it's not without its elegance, but it also is pretty obvious. Like you could make a
largely dinosaurs from the Cretaceous and Triassic.
Well, exactly.
As well.
Yes.
And there's like 2 species in that movie that are for Jurassic, and there's a 12-year-old that really annoyed me.
Yeah, that I was definitely
unironically.
I was the nerd who was so overwhelmingly happy about the movie that I let that one go. But I was definitely the nerd that was keenly aware. It's funny. I remember reading actually not that long ago. Somebody made the point that that it was like a T-Rex and a Stegosaur. A T-Rex was closer in time to an iPhone than to the Stegosaur. And
it's wild to think how long that period was. Like,
it is truly unfathomable.
And how irrelevant these talking monkeys are.
Well, that's the thing. Like anything remotely human past 100,000 years ago starts to become, at best, highly debatable.
Also, we're not monkeys, we're apes. I just want to get ahead of that comment in the comments.
Yeah, okay. Everyone can stand down. All my evolutionary biology fam. I know you're there.
They're there, and they have opinions. Someone else is going to correct that. Actually, it's not apes. It doesn't matter. It's fine.
The great apes. No, that's my understanding. Is that we are a subset of the apes. The larger. You know, I can't remember where in the cladistic hierarchy.
Apes, We're the best apes.
Oh, clearly.
I think we can all agree.
We could shoot them. That just proves we're better. We've got technology on our side. So
you're so caught up
dominion
in
over the
never
earth.
Stop to think if you should. Oh.
I'm all about the racking up the clippable moments that will eventually lead to my destruction.
The downfall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, nothing's going to top the all women look the same.
Do you want to write a score for a dinosaur game one day? I really want to do a dinosaur game one day.
It's funny where I'm of two minds on that. Because of course I would have said the same going into an Aliens game. So it's an interesting, the bar is basically impossibly high. So
I'm not saying do a Jurassic Park game, because there you just got to play the hits. I mean, like a dinosaur.
Well, but that's the thing. Any dinosaur game is going, unless it's some really different take on a dinosaur, it's like a Tekken game that you're do with metal music or something. Like, let's say it's something that you want to go really against the grain. But if you're remotely in that, let's try to capture the majesty of these.
There was a Jurassic Park fighting game where you literally could play a T-Rex beating up a raptor.
Probably.
I'm gonna look that up.
I remember the Sega CD Jurassic Park game where you play like a mercenary who has to go gather the eggs, and it's like one of those sort of quasi FMV Sega CD games, and it had music that could not have been more un-Jurassic Park like. I'll never forget the when you would be traveling across the island and it's showing you these time lapses of a car driving, and it's one of those games that when I was a kid, I was convinced. By the way,
Jurassic Park Warpath. Google that at some point. That is literally
a fighting game.
Dinosaurs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're right. You're walking in the footsteps of giants with the dinosaurs.
Like, it's quite literally one of the greatest scores. And so if you want to go the Majesty route, you're competing with. I mean, even like Giacchino's Jurassic World scores can't measure up to Jurassic Park.
No,
and
when he needs to, he goes back to the well. Right?
Yeah, and he's no slouch, and it's not like he doesn't have every kind of, it's all the same musicians even recording these scores. So it's like
no, but yeah, he knows he's a cover band. On that score, he knows he's there to play the songs.
I think that's probably he knows that. Fair way to put it. I mean, they
not in a negative way. I'm a massive Giacchino fan. I prefer his Star Trek stuff just because I think he carved his own path out a bit more with that. But yeah,
they're definitely more different from other Star Trek scores than Jurassic World is relative to the John Williams scores. But in any case, a dinosaur game. I mean, look, I for me professionally, the macro goal is always just where's somewhere I haven't been. What's a new thing that I haven't tried? And so dinosaur game, not done that
with as many feathers as I'm allowed to do. I
remember going to see the Walking with Dinosaurs live show where they have the giant animatronic dinosaurs.
Puppets, right? Yeah.
They're huge. I mean, it's like basically, life to scale animatronics, and it was one of the most impressive things I'd ever seen. And that had a big bombastic orchestral score they were piping through the speakers. I remember the BBC Walking with Dinosaurs was done by Paul Leonard Morgan.
The show had a good score, right? Like the
that's Paul. He's very good. He was one of the trio who did Cyberpunk 2077, but he mostly does film and TV,
which is good, by the way. I just started that at the weekend. I very much only heard the negative stuff about Cyberpunk. Going into Cyberpunk now, it's a really good game.
I just saw they recently hit 20 million units or something. Like, even with all the refunds and things from the launch, they were wildly popular or wildly profitable. Despite having one of the most brutal launches.
Yeah, my understanding is they just put out some updates or whatever. But like the version I'm playing is like a solid kind of first-person RPG in the tradition of like a Deus Ex or
I remember trying it on my PS4. I didn't have a PS5 yet, it couldn't quite. It definitely saw why people were so incensed that it had shipped on PS4. But even though I was like, well, so few people have PS5s, that would be ridiculous. And plus they've been developing it for a million years. Like, it's not like it's native to PS5. So it struck me as an intuitive thing that it would come out on both, even though I got the outrage. Outrage is too strong. I don't get being outraged about this game doesn't work great, although I do recognize that comparatively small investment, I guess, to buy it. And if I'm only doing a purchase of that scale once per year and it's a game that doesn't work on my system, but that's where I just would get a refund and move on with my life, I guess. And not necessarily make sure that my pitchforks were freshly filed and sharpened.
But that's you, Austin. That's the Austin way. We can't expect the internet to live up to Austin standards. But yeah, no, on PS5, playing that opening, like, I was genuinely really impressed with it. I think as well,
there's another good example of a title that's like its title is its genre. Like, it's...
Am I right in saying that's because the term predates because Cyberpunk obviously was like a role-playing game, that like a tabletop role-playing game, like that came after like Snow Crash and stuff, right? Or did they originate? Does Cyberpunk, the tabletop game, originate the phrase Cyberpunk?
That's actually a great question.
Surely not.
I had assumed
I'm gonna
not.
look that up.
Yeah, be our Alanah Googled. And
feels like probably it's from Snow Crash. Most of these things are from Snow Crash, but we'll just double check.
Yeah, I had just assumed that they'd not coin the term. It's certainly.
Well, that's what I think. I think the genre, because like Philip K. Dick stuff, like there's lots of stuff going back before, but I'm wondering
did they actually, like, we call that now cyberpunk, but whether they did.
But when was the term?
Like, would Ridley Scott have known that term? In
exactly. Did he sit down and go, "Oh, I'm doing a cyberpunk guy"?
Right. Yeah.
His narration on Blade Runner. I've talked about that on the show. I fucking love it. Where's the? Bear with me. Talk among yourself.
Yes. Yourself. Yeah. Anyway, I'm endlessly fascinated by the notion of.
It was. Sorry, I got it.
Go
1980. Ahead. It was a short story. There was a short story called Cyberpunk, which came out in 1980. So yeah, and Blade Runner came out 2 years later. So there's a chance Ridley Scott didn't know that. So that was probably the term probably hadn't locked in at that point.
Right.
So probably Ridley Scott didn't say the word cyberpunk while directing.
Well, that also means that like Philip K. Dick's writing would have substantially predated the term then.
One of my favorite things is creative people revealing how haphazard the creative process is and things that would subsequently become like keystones. So this is from the Wikipedia page for Cyberpunk. Beth K, who's the guy who coined the name, says he made 2 lists of words. The one for technology and one for troublemakers. And experimented with combining them variously into compound words, consciously attempting to coin a term that encompassed both punk attitudes and high technology. Like, it's like that's how any idiot would do it. That's how I do it.
That's like the algorithmic, the sort of like that's the AI generated, just like optimized for.
Yeah. We always want to assume that these big cultural choices were made by like
some
a committee of auteur geniuses who sat down. It's like, no, the guy had a deadline and he had to name his short story for a magazine, and he just wrote down a list of cyber, digital, computer, tech, and
that's
punk, naughty,
so
Robin Hood.
Funny. Well, he landed on a good one. His process clearly worked. It's an incredibly evocative term. That's so funny. That's like John Williams is reported to have tried something like 300 different 5-note combinations before coming up with the da-na-na-na-na from Close Encounters. Knowing they wanted 5 notes, but just like systematically going through, okay, da-da-dee-dee-da, no, na-na-na-na-na, no, like just one after another, after another.
Don't you find like that just gives you permission? Like that just basically says that the people we look up to were not significantly smarter than we are. And I say that with the utmost respect, like they were smarter than we are, but like accessibly smart, like on our level. And I love that.
100%.
I love that whenever I find something like that out about something I love, I find that so empowering. Just of like, Ridley Scott, again, that commentary, which everyone should listen to, like, is just, he's talking over Blade Runner, and he's just saying, oh, we did that because we had that thing that day, or I saw some rain, I thought that was a cool idea. And it's like, and you hear that as someone who makes stuff, and it's exactly the same thought process you go through, and you're like, okay, I'm on the right track. Like, I'm doing okay. Like, this is good.
Like, I remember watching, I remember watching a few years ago was some milestone, like 10 years ago, was some milestone anniversary of one of the Back to the Future films. It might have been 2014 actually, which would have been, I guess, like the 30th anniversary of the first film. Wasn't it 84?
Is it 84?
I think so. Something like
No,
somewhere around
right.
there.
Sounds
they
right.
did a screening at one of the theaters in Hollywood where they did like a triple feature, and some of the cast would come out and do Q&A between, like Leah Thomas came out and a couple of Christopher Lloyd might have been there, a couple of the producers, that kind of thing, and so I hadn't watched those films really since I was a kid, and I saw them a bunch as a kid, so I knew them well, but it had been a while, and seeing them as a triple feature, it was one of those where it made me really appreciate that all three are quite magnificent. But the first one is like perfection. I mean, it really is one of those films that transcends filmmaking. And to your point about like the skill and the talent of even the greatest is on some level within our reach, in the sense that I remember getting this overwhelming impression watching Back to the Future again through a kind of more mature, more analytic set of eyes, and just marveling at it all the more and appreciating the achievement of it all the more. But it also struck me as, this is a film that they didn't really make. It's a film that happened while they were at their desk, and then they got to say they made it because technically, semantically, they made it. But they then went and made the other ones, and they didn't quite add up. And I don't think that they did anything lesser themselves. Sometimes it's like the universe just kind of smiles on you, and this thing sparks in front of you in a way that you can't account for. And to me,
and
that's the reassuring.
For it isn't going to work as well, right? Because you're trying to recapture lightning in a bottle. It's I think it's.
But it also shows that
with Mikey that nobody knows what they're doing, as like an ethos of like all creative work is everyone's figuring it out. Everyone's.
That's exactly. That's the thing. It makes you realize they actually don't have some, like, yes, they're very talented, they're very smart, very creative, but they don't have some like supernatural thing that is true fundamentally beyond any of the rest of us. Like they're just
solving the next problem. They're just fixing the next thing that comes up on their desk.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so, there was something about that, and just sort of, it's like oddly comforting to know that yes, it's a perfect film, and we should all be so lucky to work on something half this quality. But it's not like they did something beyond our imagination to comprehend, skill-wise or talent-wise. That's the thing that it left me with that, and I realized, that's part of what makes, I think, Spielberg's career so unbelievable, that kind of conspiracy of the universe all working perfectly to his favor to have happened as many times. Like, I would argue Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, AI, probably for sure, Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I actually prefer Last Crusade even more. So I would say both of those films in that same Most people are lucky to have one film of that. Like, it's perfect. It's actually perfect.
He might be a genius, like genuinely. Him and like James Cameron as well. Like
Cameron is also like a freak of nature. Yeah, like he actually. You're right.
Oh, I'm sure he's awful to work with, but he's very clever.
Did you hear the story of how the crew on the Abyss had T-shirts made that said "The Abuse"? That they like the crew all like had those. Yeah, there's some very less than flattering stories. I remember, what was it? I was watching The Movies That Made Us, I think, on Netflix about, I think it was aliens, and how he was shooting in the UK and he hated it because they took tea, like high tea at 4:00, and it drove him insane.
There's a really good doc. Yeah, there's a really good documentary that came out, I think, with the second movie on DVD. I think it's like on YouTube and stuff now. It's like a 2-hour documentary, and I would the Alien documentaries that came out, I think it was the Quadrilogy box set, just had these massive, amazing documentaries. And yeah, that one. Cameron strikes me as someone who would have no problem with everyone hating him, though. So, like, fair enough.
No, I found it on YouTube. I found an interview with James Horner from only a couple years after Aliens, where, and it was one of those where he was speaking to a classroom full of students at UCLA, and this was 1991, 92. This is before the era where you just have to assume that whatever you're saying is going to get recorded and put on the internet. Like, he was speaking very candidly because it was theoretically a classroom full of UCLA students in the early 90s. But the teacher had put a little camera on a tripod and was just like ambiently recording it for the archives.
I've been caught out by similar myself.
And it's a really fascinating discussion. And it's in the pretty recent after, like 2 or 3 years after Aliens and well before Titanic, in this window of time where Horner openly says, like, after his experience of working with Cameron on Aliens, he doesn't even want to talk to Cameron anymore. He had something like 2 weeks to score that film. And
again, that's in that documentary. You should watch it. I think you'd enjoy it.
I'm amazed I haven't actually seen them. I remember getting that quadrilogy box set.
Back when documentaries were like able to be honest about production process, which I don't feel is the case anymore so much. But for the reason you're saying, that like just everyone's way too connected.
It is, yeah.
But he was openly against him, and then obviously goes back and works on later stuff with him.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. Is he basically is like, I think he's a bastard. He goes, I think he goes. There's certain kinds of directors that give you feedback. Or he said, I can't remember exactly how to phrase it, but it's something very close to, there are some kinds of directors that give you feedback, and then there's other kinds of directors that 10 days after you started writing the score and you're now standing in front of a 90-piece orchestra will say to you in front of said 90-piece orchestra, this cue is total bullshit. And he was like, I'm not interested in working with the latter type of director anymore. Some comment like that. It makes abundantly clear that Cameron, he didn't feel like the feedback was particularly, helpful. And he even says, I think you should just feel lucky that there's any score at all, because I basically had to kill myself to get this thing in front of the orchestra. And of course, this ended up being like a classic that's like Oscar nominated. The whole Bishop's Escape cue is like one of those that everybody knows. You can always hear when it's been used as a temp score and stuff, because you can hear people sort of not so subtly ripping it off. And so anyway, they of course, apparently it was Horner scored a Braveheart for Mel Gibson that Cameron was just so in love with that he called him and basically did what it take to bury the hatchet in order to get Horner for Titanic, because he just said no one else can write the score that I know this needs for Titanic, and he got an Oscar-winning score out of him for that. And then of course subsequently on they returned to it on Avatar, but in any case, I apropos nothing, but sort of related, Angela discovered on Netflix a show called Prop Culture. Have you heard of this?
I think it's a Disney Plus thing, right? Because I think there's a Tron episode.
It's on Netflix. There is a Tron episode, but it's on Netflix.
Oh, is it? I think over here it's on Disney. Interestingly, I think over here it's on Disney Plus. Sometimes things are different.
Yeah, because it's not Disney exclusively property. No, I don't think so. Although ironically, the only other one I can remember watching was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But
anyway, yeah. Sorry, I derailed there.
It's so good though, and I think you would really, really love it. And there was something. Again, this is apropos nothing. I'm making a total left turn. But though that said, Prop Culture, excellent title. That's
a great title.
The show is about this guy who's like a big time collector who's just going and tracking down rare artifacts and things from movies, and he owns a lot. He has a huge collection of rare, and at some of them it's like, there was one where here was a newspaper that was on Bob Hoskins' desk in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, like in a scene. Like it's like if you look at frame 3017, there's the paper. Like it's he owns those kinds of. But he goes around to these prop makers and into the various studio archives, and they show a scene. You remember in that movie, there's a bit where Roger Rabbit shoots through the window and leaves like the rabbit-shaped hole in the blinds.
Yeah.
They show them the prop used to create that effect, because obviously everything was all done practically, and then animators hand drew on each frame of the footage to add the 2D animation into the live action. And so, which itself is insane. And
would just never happen anymore.
Oh, it's so tedious. And so they showed how the blinds, they had the artists draw Roger's outline in like the shape they wanted to leave behind. Then they had to do these laser cutting to get a very, very precise, to cut out all the little fragments of slats filling out the shape, and then carefully, gently glue them back in and attach wires to them. It was a wire gag like you would use for a stunt, like stunt fighting.
Yeah.
But wires attached to each individual thing, and then you pull the switch and it yanks the thing backward into the window, basically. And
I love that.
They did it in one take. They shot it.
You'd have to, yeah.
And apparently the guy they hired, they mentioned on the show, he's famous as being like like one take Johnny or whatever. Like he's got this track record. But watch that one and watch the Nightmare Before Christmas, because something that they made me realize that I can't believe I've never noticed about Nightmare Before Christmas was obviously stop motion is as tedious as filmmaking gets. Basically, it's sort of
very patient people, stop motion animators. That's why I'm been with one for 18 years. It
is, yeah. So I'm sure this is not new to you. Then you've probably had this discussion, over the
I was just going
table.
for the lazy joke there. It's cool.
But the something that they made me realize that was really innovative about that film and like made it such a like ambitious undertaking was that they said something like 80% of the shots the camera is moving. So it wasn't just, and it made me appreciate, I just had this sudden epiphany where I go, I can't believe I've never appreciated that about that film. No wonder it holds up and it's so cinematic. Is they had to computerize, the technology was just barely there enough to computerize tracking the camera move as you
like a motion
frame by
control
frame.
rig,
That because they were showing how the props, that also required the props, usually like whatever's off screen, they don't make look good. As you know, the moment you look around to the backside, it looks like ass. They go, these we had to more completely build because the camera's rotating around the prop and it's just like,
it's amazing when you see them setting it up as well. I've been very lucky. This is one of the many perks of being in a relationship with someone who's so she's now a department head at Leica, who are world class, best in class. Like they are incredible. Like they're taking exactly what you're talking about and kind of taking it to the next level now. But yeah, walking around, being able to visit all these stages and just the scale they have to do now, like, because essentially, like you say, they set a precedent with Nightmare Before Christmas.
The bar just keeps racing, yeah.
Well, I went to she was working on Pirates in Adventure with Scientists, which is a really good stop motion film that didn't really blow up.
What's it called?
It's Pirates in an Adventure with Scientists. It's a
back on the subject of titles.
It's an interestingly, I think that might have been a problem for it, but it was an Aardman film, so the Wallace and Gromit studio, and yeah, she worked on that for a bit, and like they had like this basically like an entire harbour they built, and just walking around this, and even though the figures are for that, because the figures they obviously have different scales of all the characters, so I think they were pretty action figure size those particular puppets for that stage, but still like enormous space. I went to the stage for Missing Link, and they made like a forest because they needed that for that.
Was Missing Link a stop motion film? I didn't realize
Leica
that.
Again, that's the thing with Leica movies, is they're so beautiful and so precise. Like the artistry of that team is sometimes you could be forgiven for not realizing they're stop motion. Yeah, they're incredible.
I remember seeing the posters for that, and I never saw it. But Pirates,
it's a beautiful film.
Pirates in an Adventure with Scientists. I am not. All I found on IMDb.
The thing you'll know from
is
that
like a
one
TV
is
special about it.
The thing you would remember from that is there's a meme of a monkey holding up a sign, like an animated GIF, and that's from that. Like
is it possible
motion.
that came out in the US under a different name?
I apologize. It was called Band of Misfits.
Okay,
the Pirates Band of Misfits. Yeah, the book upon which it's based is Pirates.
So this is one of those,
so
like the Philosopher's Stone versus the
yeah, 100%.
Interesting. I did not know this was
That's worth a
stop
watch.
motion movie either.
That's a beautiful film. That deserved a bigger impact than it had, I think.
Looks like it made 123 million worldwide, and it's like right at the tail end of probably did decent DVD. So I'm sure it was by any measure successful.
Oh, it wasn't a flop, but I really rate that one. I thought that was really fun.
And Carrie worked on that, you said?
Yeah, so she worked. She did. What did she do on that? So her specialism is on that one she was working in the puppet hospital. Was she on puppet hospital on that one, or was she? No, she was puppet fabrication. I think so. She was making.
What is that term?
She made the hands.
Puppet hospital, is that like repair after they shoot them?
Exactly what it sounds like.
Wow.
So these puppets are all very, very delicate.
Yeah.
If you're bending them around, if you think about just like a wire toy you'd play with, it snaps after a little while, right? So if you think about all the lights and the animators moving stuff around, yeah. So she
it's a triage unit for the cast.
Yeah, so she went into that on Isle of Dogs, the Wes Anderson movie. She did. She went into the puppet hospital, ended up by the end of that movie running the puppet hospital on that film, and now she heads up the puppet department at Leica. Sorry, not the puppet department, sorry, the puppet hospital department at Leica. So yeah, she runs the team, basically run around fixing puppets, which is fascinating because it's every job. Like, you have to know literally every part of the process of manufacture because you have to fix every aspect. So they have to paint, they have to sculpt, they have to whatever.
I gotta say, this was an X factor cool I didn't see coming in this episode. Today's very special Play Watch Listen. Here's a job. I've known the basics of what she does, but the notion of specifically the puppet hospital, I think this is the first time
it's awesome.
We've broached that, and it's so fantastic. This is one of the things that I just love about games and cinema as an art form, that these very esoteric but highly essential and specific things emerge. Well,
that's the fascinating thing about her job, is it's such a small, like, there's only about...
Can't be more than like a dozen
probably about
people.
20 people with that job, like, basically, right, running that kind of team. So that's what's interesting about, like, when...
Her job is rarer than, like, particle physicist. You know, like there are fewer of her than you know, some of the most.
But it's worked out really well because I can live anywhere for my job, so I've basically always followed her around the various hubs where she can do this, because there aren't many stop motion studios in the world. It's a very limited pool. They're doing quite well. There's more of them now than there was for a bit, just because of I think largely because of like streaming services and stop motion being an aesthetic that people still kind of want.
Well, I suspect also because like even Pixar, I see people more and more kind of tweets and things just to give me a vague sense of the zeitgeist, that what made that Pixar brand of 3D animation very special and unique is starting to lose some of its luster. And you see more and more appreciation for, like, you look at the Cartoon Saloon films, like Wolfwalkers and Song of the Sea, and you see people like just raving about the artistry of those films, and you see, like, I think that we're maybe slightly overdosed on that specific kind of 3D animation look, and now they're looking to go, what else can we do? And just in the same way that practical models that you film and add CG to are just seemingly eternally more evergreen than the pure CGI effect shots. It just seems like this pendulum is kind of swinging back, at least somewhat.
Yeah, I think it goes in and out of fashion. Like, she's been, we both graduated and went into our first jobs about, 14 years ago now. And, there's definitely been ups and downs of the industry where it's been, easier to get a job, less easy to get a job. I'd say now seems to be, from my perspective, like a bit of a boom time. There's just a lot of stuff. Right. You've got, Guillermo del Toro's new movie, Pinocchio, that's stop motion. You've got... I think the director of Nightmare Before Christmas has just done, Henry Selick's just done a
he has some new.
Is it a Key and Peele movie?
It's like I think it's just Jordan Peele producing.
Oh, it's just Jordan Peele. Sorry,
horror. Wendell and Wild.
I thought it was a comedy thing. That's the one. Yeah. There's the thing Kerry's working on that just got announced.
No, you're right. It is a comedy. Actually, you know what? I think it's just Jordan Peele, but Key, i.e. Keegan-Michael Key, is in it. That's why you.
Right. Okay.
He's
That's
like one of the lead voices, but it was billed as a Jordan Peele thing, and it has that look of being like a horror, but it actually is like comedy. Makes me realize that I didn't know. Again, Wendell and Wild, I didn't know what to make of it, so I put all my eggs on the key art, like all my projection of the perception of it, and it looks a bit like a potentially like viably creepy animated Like it could be, it's one of those where the look of it could swing in the family film animation direction, or like some interesting art style for what is otherwise like the Jordan Peele thing, which is legitimate kind of eerie, atmospheric genre filmmaking.
I think it's out soon, right? I think is it a Netflix one?
This month. Yeah.
I know Kerry went to a screening of it, and I don't know if it was the screening, but went to a screening and said it was very good.
Nice.
Netflix. Oh, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it seems to be on a bit of a resurgence. She's been doing well with it for the last few years. Yeah,
well, I've learned what a puppet hospital is, and so I think I got my money's worth today.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that Alanah and Troy are not joining us, Austin.
We'll give them another few minutes. Actually, I think Troy did message me to say that
they started another podcast, I think.
Troy being in a late night time zone right now, I believe, said he basically...
He's busy. He sent me a message saying it's Last of Us 3 it's going over a bit. And
how hilarious would it be if that turned out to you couldn't possibly have known, but it's actually true.
Yeah.
And you're like,
amazing.
Charges are brought up. I get a
cease and desist from Sony the second this episode comes out. Yeah. Alanah also is saying she's not joining us. So yeah, fair enough.
She has some job doing video games.
Something about someone's dad. I don't really understand what that is.
Yeah, I don't get it.
I think I just described all Sony first-party games there, though.
That's true.
It's a game about someone's dad.
Yeah, I'm the most free amongst the freelancers of this podcast. Actually, I think Troy and I are technically the only. Like, do you count as freelancers since you have a lot of the benefits of it, but running a company? Like, are you salaried under your own corporate entity?
I'm a salaried employee of Bithell Games.
Okay,
yeah. Weird coincidence. I didn't start the company. It's just called Bithell Games. I just work there.
You were a natural fit as a result. Technically, I'm a salaried employee as well.
I'm a PAYE. I'm PAYE, which means it's an on the books employee standard kind of employment contract with my company, but I own that. So I would call myself, I don't know what does make me it makes me a business owner, I guess, but
Moneybags Mike.
Not a freelancer. Moneybags Mike.
Yeah, I guess Troy and I are the only sort of traditional freelancers then. And you're
me and Alanah work for the man. The only difference is in my case the man is me.
Well, you just stand in the mirror every morning and go, "Who's the man?"
I'm looking at the...
Exactly, I knew it. Well, then I will say I'm Austin, composer. Mike is the man. And this was Play, Watch, Listen. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.